Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's webinar entitled Pre-Application Process, hosted by the City of Los Angeles's Department of Cannabis Regulation. My name is Frank Louie with the Cal Asian Chamber, and I will be the moderator for tonight's event. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and can be viewed after the editing process on DCR's LMS system. You will be muted with cameras off for the duration of the webinar. This means that your camera and audio functions will not be available to you during this session. However, you will be able to see and hear all the panelists. This is an open chat box there is an open chat box where you can interact with one another for networking or comment on the information. Please use caution when sharing personal information in a public forum and keep your questions focused on tonight's topic. Please ask questions about tonight's subject matter in the Q&A box below. We are gathering and responding to your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll have a Q&A session where you will get responses in the last 10 to 15 minutes of tonight's event. You're all encouraged to utilize the Q&A box at the bottom pane of your Zoom screen. If you use the Q&A box for questions, everyone will be able to see the questions when they are answered. Finally, please note that content presented tonight was not created by the Department of Cannabis Regulation or the City of Los Angeles and is for informational purposes only. This information is subject to change and does not replace or supersede the Los Angeles Municipal Code nor constitute legal advice. If you have specific questions outside of tonight's topic, please call 213-978-0738 during business hours to speak to a DCR representative. Now let us transition to the presentation. Our presenter tonight is Courtney Lang. Courtney is a California-based consultant specializing in cannabis real estate, licensing, and business development. She partners with businesses and leadership to build the foundation of a successful company. In addition to her cannabis background, Courtney offers her clients over 10 years of experience working in the natural foods industry for several small to medium-sized companies. She has helped form large teams, develop and execute strategic plans and grassroots marketing campaigns, and also creates company-wide policies and procedures and manages boards and stakeholder groups. Now I'd like to ask Courtney to join me on screen. Welcome, Courtney, and feel free to start sharing your screen and starting your presentation.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Frank, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar. Today's content will be the pre-application review and land use regulations. So for tonight's agenda, we'll be taking a close look at the pre-application process and the land use review process. We'll break the webinar up into the following agenda items. So first, we'll just take a look at what is the pre-application review process. When do you submit the pre-application? We'll take a look at the pre-application forms and documents that have been created by the City of LA. Number 4 will be where do I submit the pre-application and fees. Then next, the larger part of the content will be figuring out how do I determine whether a location is compliant and eligible prior to submitting your pre-application. What tools, mapping tools are available to you for due diligence and pre-application review. I will also take a look at some of the social equity program resources available to you. We'll review the state and DCR deadlines coming up. We'll take a look at some key takeaways and resources, and then we'll open it up for question and answer. Okay, so the first section here, what is the pre-application process? I wanted to start off by reviewing the purpose of the pre-application process, which is to determine compliance and eligibility of a proposed business premise location. It's a fairly simple process. It's a standalone process that the DCR created, which allows applicants to verify a location's eligibility for commercial cannabis licensure prior to signing a lease, submitting and paying for temporary approval or annual licenses, and before making significant investments in the business and the site. In most cities and previously in the City of LA, applicants had to hold leases and pay rent for 6 months to 2 years prior to receiving any sort of approval by the local jurisdiction. So the pre-application process it's fairly low risk. It allows you to efficiently and affordably find a path to confirming a location eligibility. So that being said, what do we have here? We've got our license types that are available in the city of LA. So whether or not the city is currently accepting these applications, I've listed out for you here. For instance, for delivery, it's limited to social equity individual applicants, and the city is currently accepting applications. For non-volatile manufacturing, distribution, and testing labs, currently accepting applications. The cultivation licenses are limited to social equity individual applicants, but we are not currently accepting applications in the city of LA. So the retail licenses are limited to select social equity individuals. So those that were selected in the recent lottery, retail licenses are available to them. And then volatile manufacturing is not currently being accepted in the city of Los Angeles. So again, these are the license types available in the city of LA. Before you submit a temporary or annual license application to the city or a license application to the state, you'll need to find your business location and submit a pre-application review that ensures that business location is eligible and compliant. The two sections of the code that you want to reference when figuring out whether a business premise is compliant is this section here, 104.03. And this is going to tell you the detailed circumstances in which a business premise location is ineligible for licensure. We'll take a closer look at each of these sections later on in the webinar, but I just wanted to review the two sections. The next section is section 105, and it's the entire section. And this is going to give you sensitive use definitions and setbacks, as well as zoning restrictions by license type. So those are the two code sections that you'll want to reference when you're submitting your pre-application and looking for a location to operate your business. Next, before you can submit a pre-application, there's a couple steps that you'll need to complete. So prior to the pre-application, prior to being able to submit it, you'll need to complete the Getting Started checklist. The Getting Started checklist has simple steps and all the links that you need to complete these different processes. But first off, you're going to need to register an account for yourself as an individual person on the DCR licensing portal. Most of you have done that, and you can cross that off the list. Number two is to register your entity with the California Secretary of State, unless you're a sole proprietor. In addition to registering your entity with the state, once you get your Secretary of State number for your entity, you'll then need to have a federal employer identification number with the IRS and a seller's permit with the California Department of Tax and Fees. So number two is outside of the city of LA, you're going to be registering your business entity with the state as well as the IRS. You've got 3 forms that you need to obtain: the registration of your entity, the federal employer identification number, and then the seller's permit. Again, links to all of those and how to register for those is on this Getting Started checklist. Number 3 would be to register for a business registration tax certificate. The business registration tax certificate is going to ask you to identify all individuals or entities conducting business activities within the city of Los Angeles. So you'll be required to apply for this. And it basically is a certificate that allows you to, in the future, report your revenue and pay your local taxes. So you will need to have a business registration tax certificate prior to pre-application. The next would be to register an account for your business on the DCR licensing portal. So you cannot register your business account on DCR without having the business registration tax certificate, without having the Secretary of State, the EIN, IRS number and seller's permit. So these got to go in the same order of operations here. But number 4 is to register an account for your business on DCR's licensing portal. And then number 5 is to create a legal business entity record through the licensing portal on your business account. It basically will prompt you to create this in your DCR licensing account for your business, but you'll create that business entity record. Once you have created the business entity record, that's when you are available to apply for a pre-application. You won't even be allowed to apply for a pre-application on the DCR licensing portal unless you've finished the legal business entity record filing on your DCR account. So again, this goes in this linear flow that we've presented here today. Once you've done those 5 items, you can then prepare and submit your pre-application. During the pre-application, prior to submitting, you obviously need to identify the proposed business premise location that you wish to operate at. You'll then need to conduct the due diligence to make sure that the zoning is right, that there aren't sensitive uses within 600 or 700 feet of the business premise location. And then once you confirm all that, you're ready to submit online through the licensing portal. So at the end of today's webinar, you should definitely understand step 6 fully and clearly. So we'll help you to figure out, once you've identified that premise location, how to conduct the due diligence, and then we'll review how to submit the pre-application and pay your fees. So next, we'll take a look at required forms and available informational documents for applicants. First, I've just provided you with a list of the 3 forms or three documents that are available. The first one is the pre-application review workflow. The second is the pre-application review information and procedure bulletin. And number 3 is actually the only form that's required for pre-application, which is the landowner attestation location eligibility form. So only one of these is a form that's required for pre-application. The other 2 are just informational documents for you to review. First off, the pre-application review workflow chart. This provides a step-by-step breakdown of the pre-application review process, and it shows the steps and the order of operations for the applicant as well as DCR. And so this is the review process. It's outlined for you high level here. And then in the bulletin that goes along with the workflow, the bulletin is going to pretty much provide you all the information, the detailed information about the code and all the forms, but it'll also give you more detailed information about that step-by-step workflow so that you understand exactly what's happening in each step in a little bit more detail. The landowner attestation form, this is, again, the only form that is required for the pre-application submittal. The landowner attestation form, there are 2 landowner attestation forms, one that you submit during pre-application and one that you submit during the annual license or the temporary approval application process. So make sure you've got the right form here. It's number 4016. And this one, you'll see at the top, it says landowner attestation. Underneath it, it says location eligibility. So this one specifically is titled location eligibility. And this form will determine if your location can be utilized for cannabis activity by the landowner. So this is the landowner basically saying that they're aware that you are proposing to operate a cannabis business at this location. And the landowner or landowners must acknowledge that the applicant has the right to occupy the property for the purpose of conducting a commercial cannabis activity. It has to be notarized. So you can go to physical, like to a bank, to get this notarized. I know most banks will do it for free if you have an account there. There are also some online services where you just have to kind of join a Zoom conference with a notary public, and you can have it notarized online if that's easier for folks. but the form must be, it must be notarized. Another key piece about this form too, hopefully you have a simple process here where there's just one landowner, maybe it's an LLC, or an individual. If it's an individual, the individual can sign this form, the landowner. If their name is Courtney Lang, and that's the deed is in Courtney Lang's name, then they can sign it as an individual. If it's in a corporation, an LLC, or a trust, you are going to need to make sure that you've got documents that disclose who the agent for service of process is, or if there's an officer or owner that is the authorized to sign on behalf of the entity. In that case, if you have one agent or one authorized owner, you can have just one owner sign this form. But if there's nothing of that nature and there's 4 owners of the LLC, then you need to have each of those owners sign this form. So it is important to understand the makeup, the entity makeup for the property owner here, and make sure that you've got it clarified before you submit this, because the city will verify records, and if it shows something different, you might get kickback on this form. Okay, so those are the forms and the documents. Our next section here is where do I submit pre-application and fees? So applicants will submit required forms and information in order for the DCR to make a determination about whether or not a proposed business premise location is, one, eligible based on location restrictions, and whether it complies with zoning and distancing requirements. So those are the 2 reasons why pre-application exists here. The required information and forms. So this, again, like I said, it's a pretty simple process. When you log into your DCR licensing portal for your business account, if you've already registered your business entity, you'll be prompted to next, when you apply for something, it'll be available for you to apply for pre-application. And when you click on apply for pre-application, it's going to ask you to identify 1 or more proposed commercial cannabis license types. So if you plan to have delivery, you'll want to check the delivery box. If you plan on having delivery and distribution, you want to check both the boxes. So really you just want to identify however many or whichever licenses you intend to operate. It doesn't mean you have to operate all of them, but that's what they're going to verify against based on the specific zoning requirements and sensitive use requirements. So number 1 is identifying which commercial cannabis license types you want to operate at the business premise location. Number 2 is you'll provide the proposed business premise address, and then you'll be asked to upload the landowner attestation form. So just these 3 sections are what will be required for pre-application. Again, you'll sign into your DCR business account. You will hit apply for pre-application, and it'll prompt you to fill in the information to identify which license types you're applying for, the business premise address, and then you'll upload the landowner attestation form. As we've discussed the where to submit, we're going to be submitting all pre-applications online via the DCR licensing portal, also sometimes called Excella. Before submitting a pre-application review record, individuals must create a user account within the DCR licensing portal, and all the getting started checklist items that we reviewed earlier. Once you have submitted your pre-application, you'll be invoiced for $597. So again, once the pre-application is submitted, DCR licensing portal will create what's called a record and a record number on your account, and it will generate an invoice for the related fees. Those fees must be paid within 30 days of the date the invoice was issued, and failure to make payments on time will result in the abandonment of the pre-application record. So again, you've submitted your pre-application, you hit submit, it's going to create a record for you on your licensing account, your business account on DCR portal. So it'll create a record, you'll be given a record number, and next to that record, you'll see an option to make a payment. You'll hit the make payment and it'll give you instructions on how to make that payment. You have 30 days to make it, otherwise the record would be abandoned. If the business premise location is eligible and compliant, the record status will be updated in the DCR licensing portal to eligible for processing, and the applicant will receive a status update via email. Once the status of your pre-application review record is eligible for processing, the applicant has completed the pre-application review process, and they may submit a temporary approval application. Next, we'll take a look at how to determine location compliance and eligibility. First are just a review here of the 4 major land use considerations. So the DCR determines whether or not a proposed business premise location is compliant and eligible based on number 1, zoning restrictions, number 2, eligibility requirements, number 3, distancing from sensitive uses, and 4, distancing from other commercial cannabis businesses with on-site retail. Zoning restrictions. Commercial cannabis can only occur within certain zones of the city. And these are outlined in section 10502. It's going to also outline the sensitive uses by license type. So for instance, what you'll see is for a retail commercial cannabis, it's going to show you all the eligible zones for a retailer in that section. It'll also show you for indoor commercial cannabis cultivation. It'll show you all the zones and each other license that is available, such as manufacturing, distribution, testing labs. All of that will be available through section 105.2. It'll give you a list of the zoning restrictions by license types, and it'll also give you the sensitive use setbacks. The next section of the code is the ineligible locations. So commercial cannabis cannot occur on properties owned by certain individuals and properties that have received certain code violations. These restrictions are listed in this code section, but just to give you a high level understanding of what makes a property ineligible. Number 1 is if the business premise is owned by a person who holds office in any agency of the state of California and any of its political subdivisions, including the city and any of its agencies. So essentially, if they're a government employee or a city employee, that property is ineligible for a cannabis license. The other ones that are going to be ineligible is if the business premise site had illegal volatile cannabis manufacturing for a period of 5 years from the date of the convictions. So another piece would be illegal distribution of cannabis to minors. If the business premise site had illegal commercial cannabis activity after April 11th, 2016. And so there's a couple other listed out, but basically if anything's happened on this building after April 11th, 2016 that had illegal commercial cannabis activity, it's going to be ineligible for operating. And you'll want to make sure that you verify this with the city prior to signing any lease or getting involved in the property. So ineligible locations would be if there's been illegal activity at the site after 2016. And then again, if there's ownership of this property or of the proposed property by a local or state official. The next section is going to, actually, this is the section that details which business premise locations are ineligible. And so we just reviewed these, but I've copied and pasted the main sections here so you can take a look at them. The next piece would be the sensitive uses. So commercial cannabis activity cannot occur at a business premise location unless it meets certain sensitive use distancing requirements for desired license types. This is outlined in section 105.02. Again, the setbacks. So the distancing from sensitive uses, you've got a couple different tools to use, and they are the same tools that the city of Los Angeles uses to verify whether your property is in compliance. So we'll take a look at those maps a little bit later on. But again, the distancing from sensitive uses is an important piece. And there's two maps you'll use to verify this. And there's also the code section that you'll want to review. In the code section, what's outlined is that a retail storefront must not have the following sensitive uses within a 700-foot radius. So no schools, no public parks, no public libraries, alcohol or drug abuse recovery or treatment facilities, daycare centers, permanent supportive housing, or any other licensed storefront retailer with on-site retail sales. None of those can be located within a 700-foot radius of a retail store. The other sensitive use that is outlined and important in this code section is for non-storefront retailers, distributors, cultivators, non-volatile manufacturers, and testing labs. Again, there's a 600-foot radius just for schools, though. So again, if you're proposing a business premise for a retail storefront, you need to check the 700-foot radius to make sure none of the listed sensitive uses are within that radius. And then for other license types, it's just a 600-foot radius from schools. And then for commercial retail only, with on-site sales, so this would be a storefront retail or a micro business with storefront retail. Retail commercial cannabis businesses must locate outside of a 700-foot radius of any other retailer or micro business commercial cannabis activity having on-site retail sales. And the distance specified between commercial cannabis activity businesses shall be the horizontal distance measured in a straight line without regard to intervening structures from the closest exterior wall of each business. So that's just a specific measurement for the retail businesses that are located near your proposed location. You're going to measure it from the wall of the building to the wall of the building from each of these retail businesses, your proposed and the current one. And you want to make sure that wherever your proposed business is located, that there's no other retail located within 700 feet. And this measuring is specific for retail to retail. That's not what you do for schools and parks and the other sensitive uses. So that was just something we wanted to mention. Okay, so next I wanted to move over to the mapping tools and data. This is an important part. This is the part where you are going to review the property and make sure that it is compliant and eligible. There are two maps to use. One would be ZIMA's, the Zone Info Map Accessing System. This is where you would enter in the property address or APN, and it'll give you property information, zoning, and it'll allow you to measure the radius maps. The other one is the DCR licensing map, and the DCR licensing map shows you community plan areas, retail license availability, as well as the location of the sensitive uses that we just talked about. And so the flow that I usually do it in is I'll usually go to the zoning map first, and I want to make sure that the property is zoned correctly. These maps are not very easy to find on DCR's website, so I'm going to show you how to navigate from the home page. Okay, so you have you're on DCR's main page here, and if you go to the licensing tab and general overview, so you went licensing tab to general overview. Once you're here at general overview, you're going to scroll down the page quite a bit. In this City of Los Angeles section is where we'll find our two maps, but it's a pretty long section. And you'll find yourself down here at location requirements and sensitive use restrictions, and then the licensing map. So this first one, location requirement and sensitive use restrictions, is where you'll find a link to the zoning map. So if I click here, you're going to need to have the address in mind. So once you have an address that you've checked out, either digitally online through a posting, or whether you've gone out and physically checked out the property, regardless, what you're going to want to do is once you have the address, you'll put in this first field, you'll put that number. So I'm going to do City Hall just for this activity. And so it's 200 Spring Street. And so it is kind of finicky in terms of what you want to put in the street name too. So as you can see, you don't want to use prefixes or suffixes. So this is North Spring Street, but I'm not going to put the N for North. I'm just going to put Spring Street. So, and it shows you an example, West Van Ness Boulevard. You're not going to put West, the W for West, or Boulevard. You're just going to put Van Ness. So once you put the name of the street in there, you'll hit go. And then that'll allow you to basically figure out, do you want North Spring Street or South Spring Street? We want North Spring Street. So now we have been brought to the parcel that we want to look at. So this is 200 Spring Street. This is City Hall. And what I'm looking for right now is, again, first, I just want to verify whether or not the zoning of this parcel is correct for the use that I'm intending. So you'll need to know if you're going to be operating a delivery company or a retail company or multiple, you want to know which zones are correct for that property. So the section that I'll show you, which has the zoning information, is titled Planning and Zoning. So you'll click the button here, and then it's going to show you what zoning you have here. So this is the zoning right here. It gives you the abbreviation of the zoning types. So you'll need to mark down what zones are allowed for the specific uses that you're looking for, and verify that whatever's listed here, it complies with what came out of the zoning code that you took a look at and took notes from. So that's the first thing I always want to do, is check whether the zoning is correct. Once I know the zoning is good to go, then I will go over to the licensing map. So the licensing map, again, I got here from the DCR homepage. And the licensing map, this is going to show you whether or not the community plan area that you're in, whether it's reached the retail license cap. It's also going to show you sensitive uses, but what you'll do is you'll type in the address. Here you need the full address. So 200 North Spring Street, Los Angeles, California. So this has brought me to the same address that we were just looking at on the previous map. And this shows me, if I zoom out, a bunch of different things. One, it's going to show me which community plan area I'm in. So if I just click outside of the address really quickly, it's going to highlight the community plan area, which is Central City. It's going to highlight Central City, and it's going to show you again how many retail, what's the capacity of retail licenses and how many are available. So that's obviously really important information. The other piece is the layers over here. So you'll see this button menu, and here is where you will actually be able to scroll down and highlight. Let's say we're just looking for a delivery license here. You really just need to know where are the schools. And if you zoom out, it'll show you where the schools are. So we've noted there's a school here, but there's no other, that's a homeschool. So I don't believe that would actually be an issue, but regardless, you want to verify whether or not that is a 600-foot radius from your location, if it's a delivery or a manufacturing or distribution. And then obviously for the retail, it's a 700-foot radius. And I wish that these two maps were could overlay, because while you're going to identify the sensitive uses nearby on this map, this doesn't allow you to do the actual measuring. But what you can do, so let's say we are looking for a retail license here, and we want to highlight all of those sensitive uses. What you could do is you could just like print this page, or, you know, have it on a separate tab and be able to toggle between the two. But you're going to want to figure out how to have these two at least able to visually see them at the same time. So maybe print one or have two different windows. But you've got your licensing map here that shows where your sensitive uses are. And next, what you need to do is on this map, if you do have sensitive uses that you need to verify the distance, the first thing that you'll want to do is a radius map. So this button right here, you see the circle with a line, that is the radius tool. And that allows you to put in the 700-foot buffer. So down in the left-hand corner, this allows you to put the buffer distance, and we're doing 700 feet for retail. So that's going to show you the 700-foot buffer. And essentially, you've got to figure out which parcel these sensitive uses are on, and you're going to measure from parcel line to parcel line. So looks like we have a school right here. And so what we would need to do is measure from parcel line to parcel line. And there's a second tool to do that. The measuring tool for distances is going to be this one right here. Well, you'll see the protractor. This is the measuring tool. And the measuring tool is going to allow you to select the parcel line and then draw the line to the other parcel line. And you double click on that line, and it'll show you in the left-hand corner how many feet are the distance between the two different parcels, which is about 90 feet. We all knew that obviously this is too close to a school, but I just wanted to show you how to utilize those tools based on the city's available information. This is what the city uses in order to verify whether your location is compliant. So there you have it. That's going to allow you to create your buffer and measure your sensitive uses. It'll also allow you to verify the zoning information or is correctly zoned for the specific cannabis activities that you're intending to utilize the property for. And then again, over on this DCR licensing map, this is where you'll identify the actual location of the sensitive uses and community plan area information if you're looking for a retail license. So we're going to go back to this presentation here. All right, so for these tools, I provided you a direct link here, as well as the, if you go to the homepage, I've showed you how to find it there. Wanted to make sure you're aware of all the social equity program resources available. There's a business licensing compliance assistance program, the BLC, which I'm sure you've all registered for and are utilizing currently as part of this live webinar as part of that program. There is pro bono or low bono legal assistance available. There's a link here to more information on that. There's also one-on-one coaching available from time to time, and a direct link to when and how to sign up for that. We've got the job board, there's workforce development, and then there's seed grant programs where you can see if this is where the money goes for the program in general, and sometimes there's funding available to applicants. The DCR and state licensing deadlines, wanted to take a look at this really quick. There are quite a few to be aware of, but on the left side, you've got the Department of Cannabis Control licensing deadlines. And then on the right side, we've got the deadlines for the Department of Cannabis Regulation with the City of LA. But coming up June 30th, that's the last day that the DCC will issue provisional licenses to local equity applicants. So you had to have had an application and all the documents in well before June 30th. And if the state has had time to review your application and confirm all the documents prior to June 30th, then they'll issue a provisional license. It doesn't happen, at least when they were doing it for non-social equity applicants. Not everybody got approved, even if they submitted everything by the submittal deadline. It didn't mean that everybody got approved for the provisional license. So definitely be in contact with your licensing agents for information and make sure you're corresponding with them. This is also the last day, June 30th, for new temporary approval applications to be submitted. So that's a big deadline to be aware of with the city. I won't go through the rest of these, but definitely take a look at this deadline list and make sure that you're aware of anything that applies to your business, as they are strict deadlines. Before we jump into the question and answer, I wanted to make sure we just took a review of today's webinar. So the pre-application review process allows the DCR to determine eligibility of a proposed business premise location for licensure. The pre-application review record must be submitted for each address at which an applicant proposes to operate. So the pre-application is by address. A pre-application can be for multiple license types at that address, but for each address that you want to verify, you have to submit a separate pre-application review record. The information and form required to submit a pre-application review record is 1, the proposed commercial cannabis license types desired, 2, the address of the business premise location, and 3rd is the notarized landowner attestation form. The pre-application review fee is $597 per location. The mapping tools and data, which the city uses to determine compliance and eligibility, is also available to applicants to conduct due diligence prior to submittal. And you can avoid timely mistakes and unnecessary fees by performing due diligence prior to submitting a pre-application. The suggested order of operations for preparing and submitting a pre-application: number 1, you've got to complete the items on the Getting Started checklist prior to starting the pre-application review process. So if you're a little bit lost on how to start submitting your pre-application review, you probably haven't looked at the getting started checklist, or you haven't completed the getting started checklist, because it goes in order of what you need to do. The getting started checklist will provide links to each of those steps and instructions. So complete that checklist. Then number 2, you'll want to review the pre-application forms and documents. So we provided a list of those. It's the workflow and the bulletin. And even take a look at the landowner attestation form, because it's going to give you detailed instructions. But take a look at those prior to the day you plan to submit the application or meet with a landowner, right? You want to make sure you're aware of what information you're going to need ahead of time. So once you've reviewed those forms and documents, the third step is to identify the proposed business premise location and confirm landowner authorization. So I assume that you'll find properties either through a real estate agent, or you'll find them online on some of the listing sites. And typically you can verify most of the information that the city, you can verify all the information that the city is going to be looking at, you can verify online. So before you even waste your time going to a property, I highly recommend that you look at the maps and identify, is it in the right zone, and are there sensitive uses nearby? But that second step, the landowner authorization piece, you'll need to do, obviously, after you verified that the site is eligible. You would go to the meet with them at the site, maybe ask them ahead of time that they're okay with this landowner authorization form prior to signing a lease or purchasing a property. But anyhow, that third step is you can identify the business premise location and confirm the landowner authorization, and conducting the due diligence using those mapping tools. Once you've done that, you're ready to submit your pre-application on the DHCR licensing portal. And if approved, you're ready to move on to the temporary approval or annual license application. If your pre-application is denied, you'll need to start this process at a new location. I wanted to also provide a link to all of the resources that we've mentioned in today's webinar. So from the getting started checklist all the way down to those maps, here you have a direct link to all of that that relates to the pre-application specifically. And then there are some other resources that I think are really important, aren't necessarily specific to the pre-application process, but definitely you should check them out, because I think they're really helpful. And I recommend all my clients use them. But that is it for the resource section. That was quite a bit. I want to move on to the question and answer. And I think we have Frank helping us out.
Yep. Hi, Courtney.
Yeah.
Yeah, great job. Lots of information. So good thing that it's recorded so we can all go back through it and kind of go at our own pace to kind of comprehend and understand that. And I think the mapping tools, although they look very complex, I mean, I think a couple of good things is you did a great job of sharing how to find those, because it's really hard to find on the website. You have to kind of know where to go. There's a lot of text there. That's the number one. And number two, the tools are super valuable. And once you learn the keystrokes, I think it'll save people lots of time and labor to go, like you said, don't drive by something if you haven't checked it out, because if it's not eligible, it doesn't matter how great a spot it is, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So great job. Let's go to some of these questions. There were a few questions that came in. So the first one, Daryl had asked a question: do we need a seller's permit if we're going to open up retail?
Yes. Yeah. So you'll want a seller's permit. It's not just for cannabis sales per se, but also when you're buying any kind of equipment or buying any office supplies, you want to use your seller's permit. There's multiple uses for it, but you will need a seller's permit regardless for each license type.
Great. For each license type.
Yep.
Yeah. Great. And then Hansel asked a question. I think you answered it a couple of times, but just to confirm, the fee for the pre-application review.
Yeah, so the fee for the pre-application review is $597 per location.
Per location. Okay.
And I did want to go back to Daryl's question because I think I worded that last piece oddly, but
Yeah.
you need each business needs a seller's permit. So you're going to need a seller's permit no matter what license type you're operating. But you would have one per business in like location. So if you have a business that you're operating, a retail business, and you have two locations and it's one business entity,
Mhm.
you would need two seller's permits. But if you have a business entity that is only running one retail location, then you would just have one seller's permit. So the seller's permit is attached to the business, but also the address. So if a business just has one location, it would have one seller's permit. But if a business entity has multiple business locations, then they would have a seller's permit for each location.
Great. Could you have multiple businesses in the same premise?
You can,
Right,
yeah.
right, yep.
Yes, yeah.
And then would you have to have a seller's permit for each if there's separate licenses?
You don't need to have a separate seller's permit for each license type with the state. So the
Okay.
seller's permit does not require, if it's one address, and it's the same business entity, all you need is one seller's permit. But if it's one business entity with two addresses, you need two seller's permit. Or if it's one business with three addresses, you need three seller's permits. So it's
Right.
per business and depends on how many locations that business has. So if the business has one location, they have one seller's permit. If they have two locations, they have two seller's permits, and so on.
Yep. Great. Thanks for that clarification. And then Hansel asked a question as well. I don't know if this is something you can answer or DCR can follow up, but if our application date is set to be abandoned soon, will the date we submit the pre-application review count towards abandonment exemption or when the invoice is paid?
That sounds like a question, a very specific question to their situation. And
Yeah.
I'd love to get them an answer, but want to make sure we get a clear answer to them. So maybe what we can offer is to follow up with that specifics and make sure we've got the right information.
Agree.
to base that off of.
Yeah, and in the chat, you'll see the DCR phone number and business hours. Hence, I would recommend that you call that number during the business hours tomorrow and ask your specific question about your specific situation and get some clarification. Okay, let's see. A couple other questions here, Courtney. Can I submit one pre-application? Maybe you kind of answered this, right? Can I submit one pre-application for multiple licenses?
Yes, yeah. So again, the pre-application is per address or per business location, business premise. So regardless of how many licenses you intend to operate at the proposed business premise, it's one application.
Okay. And then here's a cultivation question. Is there a limit on cultivation licenses?
Yeah, we didn't really talk about that today, but there is a limit on cultivation licenses and on retail licenses in the city of Los Angeles. Right now, the city has met its cap on cultivation licenses. And there is a process that the DCR is working on called the Public Convenience and Necessity process that will likely become available at some point this year. And it would only be available to social equity program members, but it would basically allow you to propose to city council that your business is convenient and a necessity for that community plan area. And if you can make the case that despite that community plan area meeting undue concentration or meeting the cap for cultivation, that it actually, your business is still necessary and would serve the public. If you can convince the city council through that PCN process, then you'll be allowed to apply for a cultivation license. But again, right now, cultivation licenses are not available to the general public or to social equity applicants. But like I said, there is a future process, the PCN process. It hasn't been opened up yet, but hopefully this year. And that would make it available for social equity program participants to convince city council that their cultivation license would do the public well. And if you can convince them of that, you then still have to go through the whole licensing process, right? So it's it's still taxing, but
available, right? There's a potential pathway forward, right?
Yeah.
Let's see, are there, this comes up often, right, in a lot of communities and throughout the state, are there fee waivers available?
So currently, for the pre-application process, there is not a fee waiver available. From time to time, the city does offer them, and typically they're available and published through the social equity page on the DCR's website. So just constantly check that out. I'd say, once a month or every quarter, just make sure you're just seeing what waivers and what grants are available by the city of LA. But there is a state license fee waiver available for local equity program participants. It's really easy. There's a form that I provided on the other resources page, and it allows you to waive up to one license fee. So you can waive one license fee each year, and then you can defer as many other licenses as you're applying for. But you can only waive one fee per business entity.
Yeah, and deferring the others means you can, defer the requirement to pay.
Correct.
That fee, right? Just
for 6 months. They give you 6 months.
Great. So it buys you a little runway there as you work on your first one, right? Yeah.
If you're applying for each license under a different business entity, sometimes folks have all their licenses under one business entity, and sometimes you've got a separate business entity for each license. If you have a separate business entity for each license, then you could have one fee waived for each of the business entities. And so that's a way to get additional fee waivers, as if you've got multiple business entities. Okay,
great. Thank you. And then this next question, I think a valuable question and a thorough response will be super valuable. What can I do to protect myself and my business from spending money purchasing or leasing a property prior to pre-application review?
So pre-application review was created to ensure that applicants had a way to verify whether a property was in compliance and eligible for cannabis licensing prior to signing a lease or prior to purchasing property, right? It hasn't always been this way. It's relatively a new process, but it's really helpful because it allows you to verify it prior to getting into a lease. That doesn't mean that you aren't going to get scams offered to you or situations that aren't favorable for you. A lot of landowners are looking to get people to put money down and sign leases ASAP. And the pre-application review process still takes time, right? It's going to take you, 5 to 10 days to prepare. It'll take the city 30 to 45 days to complete the review, right? And that sometimes is too much time to allow a landowner to wait around for a confirmation from you. And so obviously they're going to want to have some kind of guarantee from you, whether you're purchasing or leasing. And you want to make sure that you just don't get stuck into situations where you're at a disadvantage. Obviously, there's certain things that they may ask for that are fair, but there's a lot of things that they might ask for that are unfair. So if you are leasing a property, I would first off recommend and see if the landlord is open to what's called a letter of intent.
Mhm.
And then have a refundable deposit. Any deposit that you're making with the landowner, you want to make sure that you're using a third-party escrow account. You never want to give 10,000 or 5,000 or 20,000, however much they're looking for
Mhm.
a deposit. You don't want to just give them a check, right?
Mhm.
You want to make sure it's in a third-party account that has somebody who is verifying that each party is following the required steps in order for the money to be released, right? So a letter of intent and a deposit, those two paired together, I feel like are pretty, it should wet their beak. So
Mhm.
I know they're gonna want a lease, but that's just not ideal that you sign
Yep.
a lease. If you are required to sign a lease, what I would say is have it be a conditional lease, what you call a
Mhm.
conditional lease. Regardless of whether or not you're going through the pre-application process and they want you to sign this ahead of time, no matter what, you should have your lease be conditional. And what that
Mhm.
means is it's going to be a standard commercial lease, but you want to have a section in it that is conditional on you getting pre-application review approval and your licenses
Mhm.
from the city of LA. So conditional lease, obviously a real estate agent or a real estate attorney can help you make sure that those proper protections are put into the lease. And then the other thing that I just wanted to make sure that if this pertains to like the pre-application, but just generally speaking as well, a lot of times there's commercial property owners use property management companies to manage the leasing of the property. So they're subleasing it.
Mhm.
And a property management company can sublease to you. That is fine. However, you still need to have landowner authorization from the whoever's on the recorded deed. So you would have to have that landowner attestation form signed by whoever's on the deed. But it just needs to make sure that the lease, the master lease and the sublease both allow cannabis cultivation
Mhm.
or cannabis activity. And you want to make sure that the master lease allows them to sublease, in fact, to you. Make sure if it's a person, an individual person acting as a property manager, you need to make sure that you verify with the property owner that
Owner.
they
Right.
have the right to do that.
Right. Yeah. Great. Great information. Great advice and suggestions. And I know we've hosted several webinars on commercial leases and contracts, and I would recommend and suggest that participants go back into the learning management system to review those and just be prepared as you enter into those types of situations. Well, great. So we're out of time, Courtney. As always, it goes by fast. So thank you, thank you again for your valuable presentation tonight. I want to thank everyone for attending this informative webinar offered by the City of Los Angeles's Department of Cannabis Regulation. This webinar recording will be found on DCR's learning management system. If you have any questions on accessing your account, please email dcr.scp@lacity.org. Thank you again for joining us and have a wonderful evening. Good night.